But let's start with the basics. The U.S. 26-man roster for Copa America. Dropping in between our last show and this one. I think we were last with you after the Brazil game, which finished in a 1-1 draw. This is the second youngest Copa squad since 2007, Herc, which I believe you were on that squad. Is that correct? We got 9 players, 23 and under on this team, 18 players that were on the World Cup squad in Qatar. Timothy Tillman is the only player that was dropped. You'll remember there was 27 on the preliminary roster, and as we discussed quite a bit, there are 4 strikers on this team. Folarin Balogun, Ricardo Pepi, Josh Sargent, and Haji Wright, who we know has been discussed as a winger. Herc, the U.S. roster looks strong, but is it better than the World Cup roster that we saw in 2022?
It is better than that roster. Now, you mentioned that 2007 roster for the Copa America. That roster was a second team. The first team, because the camps overlapped, was actually playing the Gold Cup, 2007 Gold Cup in Chicago, that final versus the Mexican national team that they won. If you remember that Benny Faulhaber screamer over Osvaldo Sanchez. Yeah, just if you needed a refresher. So that's why that team was so young. But going on to this very young team, is this team, the 2024 Copa America roster, better than the 2022 World Cup roster? Yes, Seb, yes it is. Let's go back to that 2022 World Cup roster and the players you had on that. Go to this one, you only have 3 MLS players. Of those MLS players, maybe one only sees some type of real minutes, and I'm talking about Miles Robinson, the other being a goalkeeper, and then you have Shaq Moore, who is in case you need him, in case of an emergency. And even then, I think Greg Berhalter may go a Yunus Musa, Weston McKennie, or whoever else, Timothy Weah, in that right back role. This is a very strong roster. These kids, this young roster, back in that 2022 roster, was very, very green. They're no longer that green. They have this experience, World Cup experience. In fact, I believe 20 of these 26 have that World Cup experience. The majority of these players have Champions League experience. The majority of these players are coming off championship seasons, lifting trophies, great individual seasons, some of those players, not just one, but multiple of those categories. So this is a much better team. And you also have to include the manager in that. Very inexperienced manager back then. Think of what you will of him now. He has that experience of being in a knockout round, learning from those moments, being in big tournaments, having time with this team. This is a better roster now than it ever was before.
So I'm interested that you brought in the MLS number, right? 3 MLS guys on this roster. There were 9 on the team in Qatar in 2022. You could look at that and say, well, right there, it's proof that this roster is better. I think you're right. But, Herc, I think even if we go kind of name by name, if we look at who's gone and who's in, you can see that this roster is better, right? In Pepi, Balogun, Malik Tillman, Cardoso wasn't there. Miles Robinson, remember, an injury miss. Christopher Lund, he's a new addition. Mark McKenzie, Chris Richards. Of that group, Chris Richards is a definite starter just about. Balogun and Pepi, we know, are probably going to start. We don't know which one, but one of those 2 guys is probably starting at 9. And Cardoso, we saw him start a game. It didn't go well against Colombia, but that's another guy who could contribute. The guys that you don't have, who aren't here from that World Cup roster, Jesus Ferreira, Jordan Morris, Christian Roldan, Kellen Acosta, Walker Zimmerman, DeAndre Yedlin, Aaron Long, Serginho Dest. Dest is the big name that's missing. But outside of that, the guys that you've lost, you haven't really lost too much, have you?
No. So think about this for a second. Now, I know this stat blew up in everybody's face versus Colombia, but you had a top 5 European League all 11. That's where the U.S. men's national team is today with its pool of players. That's where this roster, this Copa America roster, is today. That's why the responsibility is so great for Greg Berhalter. If we're just going off the names, if we're just going off the roster, this 2024 roster blows that one out of the water. These kids now have World Cup experience. The likes of a Christian Pulisic has a World Cup goal. The likes of Timothy Weah has a World Cup goal. Matt Turner, for as horrendous as the season has gone for him, is a goalkeeper, World Cup goalkeeper with experience in keeping the ball out of the back of his net. You have some players who have gained valuable experience at the international level. This is a better roster.
Yeah, better roster, but I have a question about whether or not it's a better team.
Different question. Different
question, but answer it for me here, because I look at it and a lot of the big question mark, Hercs, that we had coming out of that World Cup are basically still there, right? We didn't really know who the number 9 was going to be. We still don't really know that. I think in defense, you got a lot of question marks in that back line. Everybody coming out of the World Cup would sell, well, for sure, Tim Ream won't be here. for Copa America. We'll have figured something else back there. Still haven't figured that out. Serginho Dest is no longer there. The strength of the U.S. team at the World Cup was the MMA midfield, and a big part of that strength was Adams. Adams is not part of this new MMG midfield, and we don't know what that looks like at elite international level competition. Maybe it looks good against CONCACAF, but this isn't just going to be CONCACAF. So to me, a lot of those questions, and I throw Matt Turner in there as well, make me say, yes, better roster, but I don't know if better team, because some big parts, Turner, Adams, are not the same as they were in 2022, and some of those big question marks, Herc, still remain. We all thought Balogun would be the locked-in number one by now, or at least a lot of people did when he joined the pool. But he clearly has not taken that job and made it his.
You didn't even mention Gio Reyna. So a talent like Gio Reyna, who many want to include as a lockdown starter in this group, it was MMA. It wasn't MMGA. It wasn't MGA. It was MMA. Now he's in that midfield, or in that triangle, if you will, as a playmaker. How do you factor that in? How do you move forward? I agree with what you're saying, and a big part of that's the manager, is how do you fit these pieces? How do you make this puzzle work for this team going forward? That's a very good team, young team that proved something to themselves at that World Cup. Maybe it wasn't a great World Cup in terms of the 2002 World Cup team and the run they made, but for how young they were, getting out of their group, and to where they got, you would certainly say it was a success for that group. But I agree with you. Is it a better team? Remains to be seen.